Yeah, back in the future again one more time today. Now, talking about the British Industrial Revolution SAQ that we did last week. This was our third SAQ. So you guys are really cranking these out, and scores were really good on this one. So let's take a little discussion. For this question, I chose this one because of two things. Number one, action words. This is a good opportunity for us to talk more about action words. We talked about it way back in the beginning of the year, but never a better time than during the review to come back to them. Second reason is time frame. This question shifts time frame from the 1700s to the 1800s. It also shifts setting from inside Britain out to the European sphere to back inside to Britain. So let's take a look at these two things. First off, action words. You've got two different action words here. First one is describe. Second one is explain. So for the first two questions, you've got to describe. This just simply means to identify something. In this case, you're identifying the cause and end effect. Second action word is explain. Explain is more difficult. It's quite number three. Explain means that you have to identify something, you have to tell why or how it matters. So in this case, we're looking to identify one political reaction. And in this case, you're probably going to want to know why. If it's talking about a reaction, you're going to want to know what caused, what was the action that caused the reaction. All right, so that's action words. The second one is the time frame. So in this case, like I said, this question shifts from the 1700s to the 1800s. So for this first question, we're talking 1700s. The setting also matters. Where you're talking about matters. So we're talking about 1700s Britain as far as causes for early industrial revolution. So for us, we're talking just Britain for the French Revolution. If you're unit 3, 4, will be late unit 3, late unit 4, and early unit 6. So we're talking about the first imperialism. Remember, the first imperialism is from America. Britain had a big part to play in that. That's why I'm speaking English right now. We're talking about the 7 Years' War. We're talking about the American Revolution. These are all things that are happening during this time period. Let's see, 1800s. So question B and C. In the 1800s, the first question talks about the European balance of power. So in the 1800s, for B, this is where you're looking at unit 5, unit 7. Just after the French Revolution, talking about things like Napoleon, nationalism, the second imperialism, that would be like the scramble for Africa, the move on India and China, and the lead up to World War I. And then for question C, you're going to look into political reaction in the 1800s within Britain. So this is what you're going to talk about, stuff in unit 6. Unit 6 is literally called industrialization and its effects. You could talk about conservative, liberal, socialist, Marxist, nationalist, less nationalist in Britain. But we're going to talk about things like the workers versus the owners, the terrible living and working conditions and the reaction to them. We did like an entire stations thing on that one, whether you like stations or not. We did a whole thing on that one. And then we wrote a DBQ on it, which you've gotten back. Workers' movement, increased suffrage, and we moved from tiny manhood suffrage to universal manhood suffrage in the span of about 90 years. All of these things you could discuss. And so let's get into some of the answers. As far as Britain's early industrialization, there are a ton of answers. I remember distinctly writing a list on the board. We talked about things like access to raw materials like iron and coal, how it's very easy in Britain. We talked about how rivers are both there for transportation and for power. Water wheels, but also barges that move stuff. Harbors, several of you guys mentioned harbors. It's really easy because they're an island, right? You move things from one side of the island to the other. We mentioned a strong banking system back in the day. I'm sure anybody brought that up. We talked about political stability, which means that there's no revolution. Now, this is the 1700s, so Britain is very much still involved in many wars. Remember, this is the American Revolution time, and this is the War of Jenkins' Ear, if you remember that one. This is the 7 Years' War that here in the U.S. we call it the French-Indian War. So still involved in wars, because none of them are at home. There's no political instability at home. There's no revolution, there's no civil war in the 1700s in Britain. And that's the important part. There's no internal trade barriers. Remember that the Germans, they couldn't work together. Later they solved that with the Zollverein, but that's sort of the best image that I could give you of the internal trade barriers. They have a mobile labor force. Remember that the agricultural revolution increased the population in the countryside. Those people have to then find something to do because there aren't enough jobs in the countryside, and so they move to the cities, and that creates that mobile labor force. And more than few of you mentioned that. And also the cottage industries that lay the foundation for the Industrial Revolution. I wanted to make a special mention. Some people mentioned how they're not involved in Napoleonic Wars. Now, first of all, that's outside the time frame, so you can't talk about that. Secondly, again, while they're not involved with the Napoleonic Wars in much that Napoleon and the French invade the British, no, the British are very much involved in the Napoleonic Wars. They're the ones who fought the Battle of Trafalgar to prevent that Napoleonic invasion. But they're also the ones who fight the primary companions of the Battle of Waterloo, which is Napoleon's final defeat. So it's not that they aren't involved in the war, it's that it's not at home. All right, second question. Describe effects of Britain's industrialization on the European balance of power, and we're all cast on Europeans for a reason. That talks about our setting. There's probably also put in that this is 1800 to 1900. So this is the time period when we're talking about kind of like nationalism. We're talking about the revolutions of the early 1800s. We're talking about the Industrial World War I. And so, the answer to you literally says these two things, or these first two bullets, are the first two things on the answer to. This is all you have to say to get the point. As a result of industrialization, Britain became a powerful nation. Mind blowing. That's all you had to say. All you have to say. Now, many of you said that in one way or another. Many of you went into greater detail, and I appreciate that. But you could have also just said, as Britain industrialized, the balance of power tilted towards them. What? Of course, some of the reasons are going to be that the new technology leads to stronger economies. It gives them better weapons. It means that they can make stuff, improve weapons faster. It means that they can move on places like Africa, India, China with more rapidity. We could talk about how the British and the French joined up to defeat the Russians at the Crimean War, and talk about how industrialization played a huge factor in that. It also leads to competition between nations. As mentioned with Germans, how the Germans increase their navy, increase their army in order to compete with the British, and that tilts the balance of power and totally throws it off its axis as you lead into World War I. So any of that stuff would do. But again, all you have to say, as Britain industrialized, the balance of power tilted towards them. Anyway, question C, political reactions within Britain. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned this. Several people tried to talk about how the political reaction outside of Europe, outside of Britain, or the political reaction to Britain in other European countries. The question specifically states, within Britain, 1800 to 1900. And this is the perfect time to bring in this terrible living conditions. But remember, this is an explain question. So you've got to say why. You have to explain the reaction. So in other words, the reaction, laws are passed, that's the reaction, because, that's the why, living or working conditions are terrible. That's the action, right? So the laws are reacting to the terrible conditions. And you can mention something like the mine theft. You can mention something like the restriction in hours. You can mention something like restrictions on child labor. You could mention things like the Wages Act or something like that. Any of those things would work, and we talked about those extensively in class, and I think those would probably be the easiest ones to look at. You could also say that some workers lean toward socialism, Marxism, communism, because of the living and working conditions are terrible. And so, trying to emphasize this is happening because of this. So if you wanted to explain, you could use the you've got this happening, and as this happens, why does it move to this? I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a way to remember that explain it has to have a why. Which one doesn't have a why? So that doesn't help. The labor unions advocate for reform, again, because living conditions and working conditions are terrible. And eventually this is going to lead to the Labour Party, which is still a major party in Britain today. Urbanization, and some people mention this, that people are moving from the countryside to the city. That's awesome. How does that lead to a political reaction? So this is one of those how questions. So urbanization, how does that shift things? It shifts and it leads to shifts in voting and redistricting. And we saw that in the reform bills of 1832 and the 1850s. And a couple of you went out on a limb and said, rising nationalism because the British dominate the balance of power. I never would have thought of that. So props to you people. There were like 5 or 6 of you. But yeah, the British are kicking butt and taking names, and that's going to lead to rising nationalism within Britain. And so, yeah, political reaction within Britain in the 1800s, nationalism worked. And again, why is nationalism rising? Because the British are dominating the balance of power. You got to have that because to answer why or how. Okay. That's the lowdown on this question. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. I'll be reading the rest of your SAQs as quickly as I can and getting these videos out to you as quickly as I can. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Wash your hands. And I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys soon. All right. Take care.